Lost Soul aside is genuinely one of the most unintentionally funny games I've ever played. In this video, I'm going to do a full playthrough of the game while explaining the story, the gameplay, and the various systems. So let's not waste any more time and get straight into it. The game opens up with a girl named Louisa dreaming about something known as the Grand Cycle. At this time, we don't really know what any of that means, but it seems like we do get an insight as to what she's dreaming of. A full-scale war involving these alien-like creatures and an army doing their best to fight back. We also see this giant flowing dude come over a mountain and absolutely wreak havoc.
Will you resolve? Or against all odds can we survive once again?
Shortly after, we take control of this character who is clearly extremely strong, but we still have no clue exactly what's going on. This section finally ends with this giant tentacle-having guy reaching down towards someone.
Same moment every time. My dream comes to an abrupt end.
And then we switch back to reality. Lost Soul aside takes place within the Empire of Celestria, and we get a quick introduction to some of these starting locales. The Imperial capital serves as exactly that, a large city that the citizens of the neighboring harbor region have no access to. The harbor is more or less considered the slums. It's not long after that we get a look at our protagonist and some of his companions. Kaiser is one of the most generic looking and monotone main characters I've ever come across, but more on that later. The premise here is that Kaiser and Celine are part of a rebel group known as Glimmer. Today happens to be the Emperor's birthday, and he celebrates by throwing a parade in his own honor. Kaiser and his team are planning some sort of attack or distraction during the parade to send some sort of message against the Empire. We also learn that Louisa is Kaiser's sister.
I'm glad you're safe.
How have you been, Louisa? Is everything okay?
The harbor is essentially policed by the Imperial Army, who subjugate the local population to high taxes and general use of force.
Leave it alone!
We get our first real look at the combat system, and yeah, it does look fairly simple now, but I'd say the combat ends up being one of the game's high points as we progress. We finally make it to the secret hideout where the members of Glimmer are planning their high-stakes operation. We also meet two additional characters, Gethia, who is an archaeologist, and Zana, a gifted one. To explain it simply, a gifted one is a person who is able to wield unnatural powers. I'll explain this in detail a bit later. So, during this meeting, the plan is put into place. Zana and Gethia will interrupt the parade and make the Emperor aware of Glimmer's presence. Honestly, I have no idea if they were meant to assassinate him or simply just appear in front of him, then disappear. It wasn't exactly clear. Our job isn't as important. All we have to do is set off a bunch of fireworks for some reason. I guess mainly to signal the arrival of Glimmer. So, Louisa and Kaiser head out to the top of the Capitol building. This first area is fairly simple and serves more so as a tutorial section. A lot of this area just ends up being these short platforming sections that require us to wait for Louisa to push a button. We do this whole button pressing to activate a platform a few more times, and we run into some members of the Imperial Army that we have to take down. The platforming sections in this tutorial area are fairly easy, but I definitely underestimated just how many platforming sections the game has throughout the playthrough. We finally make it atop the building and we are able to take in the sense of scale. The city looks alright, I guess. We place the firework launcher on its designated spot and wait for the show. The parade finally starts as the Emperor and his Holy Order enter the scene. The plan is in action, and this marks the moment for Glimmer to strike. For some reason, there's a short fight sequence between Zana and the Imperial Army, and then Gethia makes the two disappear. Louisa and Kaiser launch the fireworks, and I guess with that done, they've completed their plan. The Emperor and the Holy Order take notice, while Louisa and Kaiser celebrate. Unfortunately, the celebration is cut short, as an Imperial airship somehow locates the two on top of the building. Though that ends up being the least of their concerns, as these giant blue orbs are falling from the sky, and those very same alien-looking creatures from the opening have made their way into reality, causing all sorts of chaos. Louisa and Kaiser are on the brink of death. Kaiser throws his sister back up to safety, but unfortunately for him, he's unable to hang on. Somehow he lands safely in what appears to be a deep underground bunker within the city. Here, however, he does encounter some more of the Imperial army. At this point, I was getting a bit more comfortable with the combat. The heavy and light attacks can be strung together to create some really flashy combos. We stumble upon one of those alien creatures underground, where it looks like they are taking the life force of an unconscious person. This is the first time we actually fight one of these things, however, these small ones hardly pose a threat. We come across a larger group of them, but they are subsequently taken out by a large explosion that even causes us to fall further into the bunker. At this point, we start hearing a mysterious voice that simply refers to us as human. We delve a bit further into the bunker and come across this large energy source that looks like it's harnessing a ton of power. The voice tells us to use the console within this area to overload the energy chamber. Kaiser is apprehensive, but the voice asks if he wishes to see his sister and allies again, and Kaiser, being the one-dimensional main character that he is, quickly agrees to do so. This causes yet another explosion, but this time around Kaiser encounters a massive dragon. Yes, you heard that correctly. This dragon essentially tells Kaiser that the Voidrax have invaded Primarius, and that the only way to stop this invasion is by merging with him.
The Voidrax have invaded the Primarius, leaving only destruction in their wake.
How do you know so much?
The dragon tells Kaiser that he is the first human to hear his call in over a millennium. At this point, we don't know how or why any of this is happening, but regardless, the dragon ends up granting Kaiser his powers.
Mind, embrace my power.
What are you doing? What's happening?
So now combat is a bit more evolved with this floating dragon named Lord Arena. He allows us to use what are called arena powers. These are basically a variation of active skills that enhance combat by giving you more options. There are a good amount of these to unlock as well. So earlier in this video we met Zaina, a gifted one. I think now is a good time as ever to explain how someone becomes a gifted one. Essentially, anyone who comes in close contact with the Voidrax energy becomes a gifted one. This energy grants them some sort of power that a normal human cannot wield. These powers vary from person to person, and we'll see all sorts of gifted ones throughout the playthrough. We eventually make it back out the bunker and onto the streets of the Imperial City. The city is absolutely crushed as these Voidrax creatures are running around and destroying everything in sight. We locate our sister Louisa being chased by one of those creatures. Our mission here is to find her and bring her back to safety. On our way, we get stopped by a group of Voidrax. Zaina is thankfully there to assist in combat as well. Sometimes in this game, you'll have a companion to assist you in a fight, but these moments are very few and far between. We run into another group of Voidrax, but this time around we are met by another gifted one. Apparently this guy who goes by Victor is able to wield swords. He even has the ability to use them as a machine gun. If there's one thing this game has, it's creativity. Louisa is at a dead end and it's all but over for her. Thankfully, we appear just in time to kill the Voidrax, but the reunion is cut short as we counter what is basically our first boss battle. Now I'm going to give the game credit where it's due. It genuinely has some of the most intriguing boss designs I've ever seen. Some are good, some are okay, and some are just so frustrating. That being said, this guy that we're fighting isn't a real boss. I'd say it's more of a mini boss. Regardless, these fights can last upwards of 5 minutes, which doesn't sound like a lot, but definitely feels like a lot when playing the game. We finally take the boss down, but get stuck under this giant side of a building. A giant Voidrax enemy appears out of nowhere, and a new character we haven't seen before named Vesper is in its line of sight. The monster starts to steal Vesper's soul, but Vesper thinks quickly and instead grabs Louisa to take his place.
Louisa!
After having her soul taken, Louisa is basically left in a coma-like state. This in essence sets in motion the rest of the game. Kaiser wants his sister back. At this point, it's assumed that she's dead, but Arena reveals that she can still be saved. During a conversation with the team, a lot begins to unfold. The Voidrax are soul collectors. They take human souls and hoard them at a fortress. We also learn that humanity, and the Voidrax went to war many years ago, with humanity coming out on top, but we don't know how just yet. They also learn of a location named Mount Salvation, the first place where Louisa's soul might be, since that's where the battle between humanity and the Voidrax took place. So we head on over. There was this cool little overhead map that popped up. I thought I was going to be able to control the boat and steer us to the next location, but nope, this is just a small cutscene that plays out when you go from location to location. Upon arriving at Mount Salvation, we run into a girl named Liana. She is the daughter of Celeria. We'll be meeting her shortly, so try to remember that. Liana is very important because she acts as a save system, a potion crafting person, as well as someone you can buy from. And she mentions that the four lords who are sworn to protect Mount Salvation seem a bit corrupted by the surge of Voidrax energy. It's not long on our journey to the top of Mount Salvation that we come across the first of the four lords. Lord Golden Lion serves as an introduction to this area, but it doesn't take long to realize that this is basically what the objective is within each region. We eventually reach Lord Golden Lion, and this starts what feels like our first real boss battle. I think now is a good time to explain how fights work in this game. Essentially, bosses and mini-bosses have two meters associated with them, one of them being a health bar and the other a break bar. Each time you attack, both bars take a hit, but bringing the break bar down completely renders the enemy stunned. This gives you a chance to dish out some big damage and also pull off a sync finisher. Sync finishers are basically long attack animations that put out a good amount of damage. We end up defeating Lord Golden Lion, who loses his corrupted aura and goes back to normal. Defeating him grants us another arena power, but early on in the game, you can only have one equipped anyway. We then run into the second of the four lords. This one an archer named the Rose Queen, and as you might expect from the name, she basically puts roses and thorns everywhere. This leads to this cool little platforming section where you have to work your way around the obstacles that she places around the platforms. Eventually, we do catch her. You'll notice that at the very top of her health bar is a small fire symbol. This designates that she is weak to fire damage. The game does have an elemental system at play that influences combat quite heavily. Different bosses and enemies will be weak to certain damage types, and you will also need to gain resistances through trinkets to make fights against certain bosses easier. We do end up defeating her, and like the previous boss, loses her corrupted aura. Now, in between these boss fights are these large platforming sections and some smaller combat encounters, but I'm choosing to cut most of them out, otherwise this video would be far too long. We come across the third of the four lords, who goes by Lord Whitecloud. As you've probably noticed, each boss sort of wields their own elemental power. By defeating certain bosses, you'll gain weapons that inflict a certain damage type. There are 4 weapon types in this game, but at this point we've only been able to use one of them. Regardless, by the end of the game we will have 4 weapon types, and within each weapon group we'll have 4 different elemental types to cover all our bases. We eventually defeated Lord Whitecloud and remove his corrupted aura by doing so. Honestly, it's not explained why defeating them removes it, but let's just go with it. We also get our first new weapon. This weapon is called Snowy Peak, and it dishes out frost damage, and it'll come in handy later. Also, it's worth mentioning that a lot of these levels have explorable side areas. These side areas might lead you to these mechanisms that reveal what are basically combat challenges. Completing these challenges earns you a different set of rewards in the form of trinkets or money. I did try some of these and was able to complete most successfully, but I never really found the reward for doing them worth it. Anyway, we finally make our way to this portal-looking device. This device transports us much higher into the sky, presumably to the peak of Mount Salvation, which was our target to begin with. Upon landing at the peak, we come across this massive dragon. If it looks like the dragon that we encountered early on in the game, you'd be right, and you get bonus points for paying attention. This dragon is an apparition, however, and Lord Arena lets us know that. The fight itself starts out fairly interesting. The mechanic here is pretty simple, however. Dodge all enemy attacks and chip away at the dragon's claws. That's basically it. You do this over and over again, and yes, the claws regenerate each time you break one of his health bars. I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but each boss has a certain number of health bars, which is designated by the blue diamonds on the top of their bar. Essentially, I had to go through the routine of breaking his claws 3 times total. We do end up taking him down, and this time we get a pretty cool animation to play out. The dragon ends up being this guy named Lord Buckhorn, the last of the 4 lords. Anyway, we finally make it to the mountaintop where we meet Celeria. Celeria and Lord Arena go way back. The two fought alongside each other during the fight against the Voidrax many years ago. We inform Celeria of what's happening. The Voidrax are back and are harvesting human souls. She lets us know that if they are in fact taking souls, then the one place they can store them in are soul crystal fragments. We also learn of a person named Aramon, in other words, the leader of the Voidrax, who had been sealed away all those years ago by Celeria and Arena. The two purposely split the soul crystal into fragments as a safety measure to keep Aramon from regaining any power. Somehow he's managed to send the Voidrax back to the planet and has them harvesting souls. The greater his power grows, the weaker the seal between reality and the alternate dimensions gets. This is the first time we hear about alternate dimensions, but these are basically where the soul crystal fragments are stored. The only person who can access these alternate dimensions being Kaiser, due to the fact he is merged with Lord Arena of Voidrax. Now at this point, we finally get our hands on our second weapon, a great sword. I think I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed with its use, but I'll get more into that in a bit. Along with that, we finally get access to our first alternate dimension. The first one is called the Chronocore Dimension. Now it's worth mentioning that there are 5 of these dimensions, so we got a long way to go. Liana is somehow here. It's not explained how she got here, but it is weird considering only Voidrax exist in these dimensions. We also have our first real run-in with Aramon, the leader of the Voidrax. He and Arena have some history as the two faced off many years ago in that same war that locked Aramon away. Now Aramon moves through these dimensions seamlessly, but he's unable to touch reality. Regardless, within each dimension, he controls what I call a Dimension Guardian. These are final bosses within these dimensions that lead to the Soul Crystal Fragment. It's also worth mentioning that each dimension has its own theme. They also have their own platforming challenges and unique enemy encounters. One thing you'll notice is that each weapon type you get interacts with the game world. For example, the Greatsword gets slammed into the ground to create a barrier when prompted, or it allows you to move columns around during the puzzle sections. We'll see this mechanic time and time again. I mentioned that I found the Greatsword disappointing, and the reason being is the simple fact that it's just too slow. A lot of the enemies in this game move fast, to the point where the swing of a Greatsword is too slow to actually register a hit. This was most notable during some boss fights where it felt like I'd never be able to catch an enemy. We make our way to this portal, and what this does is essentially send us deeper into the dimension and closer to the Soul Crystal Fragment. These areas are filled with various platforming puzzles. These are still on the easier side, but towards the end game, the platforming is borderline frustrating. You'll see what I mean. We also come across these large metallic containers that actually store arena powers. Accessing these either gives us new powers or the ability to upgrade an existing power. I'll go over all the arena powers as well as the skill tree in a bit. It'll make more sense when we've attained all our weapons. After what felt like a lifetime, we finally made our way to the Dimension Guardian. These fights are some of the biggest and most unique that the game has to offer. I really did enjoy these quite a lot because they all tend to introduce some new mechanic that isn't seen anywhere else. This being the first of the dimensions was on the easier side, but was still challenging enough to require some healing. At this point, you're probably wondering about the difficulty setting. Well, your first playthrough of the game doesn't have a difficulty that you can change. You have to play it how the devs intended. If however you find the game too challenging, you do get these trinkets called Celeria's Keepsakes. These are basically difficulty modifiers by making you take far less damage and also allowing you to deal more damage than you otherwise would be able to. Anyway, we eventually take this boss down, and each big boss fight has a unique and flashy killing cutscene. And we finally get our first Soul Crystal Fragment, 1 down, 4 to go. After returning to Celeria, she tells us a bit more about the situation. Aramon has been remotely manipulating the Voidrax by channeling energy into these alternate dimensions, which would eventually lead to the breaking of the seal. She also mentions the 4 remaining locations that house the other alternate dimensions. Without wasting any time, we head on over to Skylake, the second location. As we head out, we're met with a cutscene featuring the Emperor, Victor, and Vesper. He tells us that it's their duty to hunt down members of Glimmer. This, of course, stemming from the events that happened at the parade. He's convinced that Glimmer is responsible for this Voidrax invasion. He also bestows some power onto Victor and Vesper, and oddly enough, it looks just like that corruptive aura that we saw back on Mount Salvation and the Four Lords. We arrive at Skylake along with Gethia. Gethia is under the impression that the entrance to the alternate dimension is within Buckhorn Palace. Getting there, however, is not an easy feat. Between our journey to the palace are a number of combat encounters, but I instead want to focus on the environmental design. Honestly, the dev team did a really solid job in creating these fleshed out levels. Sure, some areas start to look repetitive, but graphically speaking, a lot of them look really good, and you can tell they put a lot of time and attention into it. At one point, we get this cutscene with Kaiser basically flying over this giant wall. This whole cutscene rubbed me the wrong way because if he's able to just move like that on a whim, then what the hell is the point of all these different platforming sections that require precise input and timing? Anyway, we run into a member of the Holy Order. If you remember, the Emperor sent his team to look for members of Glimmer. Somehow they found us, and now it's time to face off against Victor. Like I've said a few times, the fights against these bosses are very unique. Some require creative strategies, while others test your precise timing and block inputs. Because I was playing on the game's base difficulty, the dodge and block windows felt very large. I guess I'll go ahead and spoil it now, but basically once you finish the game, it allows you to up the difficulty. Your first playthrough is done on normal, completing the game unlocks hard. Once you complete, you can play the game on nightmare. Anyway, we finally take down Victor. He calls us a peasant and dips out.
Meet again, peasant. You can.
Let's go ahead and dive into the weapon customization system, which I felt like wasn't all that robust, but cool nonetheless. Basically, you can customize weapons with various accessories. These accessories have different buffs tied to them, whether that be additional healing, increased crit chance, and so on. Stacking multiple of the same accessory leads to a higher version of that accessory. So for example, 2 crit increase accessories will double the crit output. You also can design your weapon by physically placing the accessories on your weapon. Pretty cool. As we continue to make our way through the area, we get attacked by an Imperial airship. An explosion causes the level around to collapse, making it so that we essentially have to snowboard our way down. We eventually make it down to this area where we encounter a large Voidrax. If you've been paying attention, you might recognize this one as the same Voidrax who took Louisa's soul. That's not important right now, as we got bigger issues on our hands. The game likes to throw these large boss fights at you out of nowhere, and I love it. This particular fight featured this huge Voidrax with wings. Like the most of the other fights we've encountered so far, it was largely based on dodge and block timing. I only mention that because as the game progresses, we start seeing boss fights with more unique mechanics implemented. Overall, it wasn't a hard fight, but it was entertaining nonetheless.
Kaiser, hey, you okay, kid?
That fight in particular was a bit too much for Kaiser. He ended up fainting and was woken up by Liana. Clearly Kaiser is still getting used to his power. That being said, we get introduced to one of the bigger open areas that the game has to offer. This particular area asks that you interact with these concrete slabs. Interacting with all 3 opens up the path for you to continue to the palace. There's also a random world boss fight thrown in the mix, but I'm all for it. At this point, we've been through a lot, but we've yet to even enter the alternate dimension yet. We get all 3 slabs completed and can move forward. This particular encounter has us destroying these 3 Voidrax who are attempting to launch an attack. In the background, you can see Gethia working to get that portal working. This is another time mission, but the time allotted is more than enough. We eventually defeat all 3, which ends with us jumping into the portal. We make it to Buckhorn Palace, and Kaiser and Gethia share a little moment, but let's be real, there's no time for that. We encounter another puzzle, and I said I wouldn't show all these, but seeing the lights align was kind of satisfying. Also, this is another example of using your weapons as a gameplay mechanic. In order to move these pillars, I had to strike them with my greatsword. Eventually, this pathway leads to another encounter with that Voidrax. This time around, we actually get to fight him. The fight itself doesn't last all that long, however, as he ends up trying to make an escape before we get a chance to kill him. This leads to this section where we are traveling through portals and attempting to navigate the level while he crushes and breaks existing pathways. It's these random moments where the game kind of shines, in my opinion. The whole section just looks really cool, to be honest. We eventually make it to this area where it's more platforming. A new mechanic is introduced where we can swing onto these glimmers of light and use it to cross from one to another. Again, it never failed to surprise me how involved some of these sections get. When I heard about the game, I thought it was going to be pure combat, but there are long drawn out sections like these. Anyway, we find the Voidrax again. This time, however, he comes equipped with a giant sword. This looked like it's finally the showdown we've been waiting for. A lot of these bosses only took me one attempt. In fact, I'd say 98% of the bosses only took one shot. The game isn't meant to be Souls-like difficulty, and that's not what I'm getting at all. But just for the sake of argument, the vast majority of fights weren't too difficult. It doesn't take too long for us to break him and eventually defeat him.
That was for Louisa.
By the way, we've been in this area for quite a while now, and we've yet to see even a speck of the alternate dimension. I know the game took a decade to make, and it totally makes sense considering how long and drawn out some of these areas are. In total, I'd say the game took me close to 18 hours, and by the end of it, it felt like it could have been shorter. It's a weird argument to make, but I actually feel like the game had more stuffed into it than it realistically needed. There's quite a lot of fluff that I'm cutting out for your sake and my own. Regardless, I just don't feel like the game really needed to be as padded as it is. Sure, the combat system is fun, but as the game wore on, I was hoping the finish line would be in sight, but it genuinely felt like this game was never going to end at times. This particular area had me fighting this same group of enemies literally 3 times in a row. Believe it or not, there's still another boss fight we have to go through. So far, we fought Victor, one Voidrax boss, an additional Voidrax boss who took Louisa's soul, and now we're up against Vesper. The fight against Vesper marks the second time we went against one of the Emperor's Holy Order. This guy wielded 2 swords, but actually ends up combining them into a twin blade midway through the fight. His fight had some more area of effect mechanics than we usually see, but I was still able to take him down in one attempt. He ends up leaving the scene by doing a cool ass backflip. We exit the scene by jumping through a portal. This portal takes us to this weird area where everything is gray and it seems like we're in between realities. If you think this is the alternate dimension, then you'd be wrong. Instead, here we fight the Buckhorn Spirit Dragon, the final boss within this particular area. This particular fight was extremely fun and engaging and really flashy overall. As far as boss designs go, I think this is easily one of the best that the game has to offer. It even has some unique mechanics like breaking these tree branches down to weaken the dragon. The fight and the arena really complement one another, and I have 0 complaints about this fight, but I really want to get into the alternate dimension already. We eventually whittle the dragon down, and towards the end of the fight, he is essentially a shell of himself, unable to muster the energy to even strike us back. Once we finally defeat him, he cooks up a tornado. From this tornado appears our newest weapon, the polearm. This weapon ended up being my favorite to use by far, and I'll explain why in a bit. Right now though, we've completed this fight and we finally have access to the alternate dimension. Only took like 3 real-life hours. This new dimension is called the Aeroflux dimension. As I stated earlier, each dimension sort of has its own unique themes, enemies, platforming, and puzzle sections. And of course, it wouldn't be right if we didn't run into Aramon as soon as we enter. He gives us a little speech about how he's going to end us and our world-saving endeavor. Typical villain stuff.
This pathetic world-saving game of yours once and for all.
I skipped a lot of these smaller combat encounters as this one is more important. In this section, there are 4 enemies who are tied to these cubes. Killing these enemies makes the cubes vulnerable. Now is a good time to talk about the polearm and its use case. The polearm can be used both as a melee weapon and a ranged weapon. The heavy attack in this case makes it so that you throw mimics of your polearm at enemies. Holding down the heavy attack puts you in this perspective where you can actually aim and choose where to shoot. This mechanic ends up used quite a lot in combat and within the actual levels themselves. After clearing that area, we're able to open up access deeper into the dimension. I actually liked how the Aeroflux dimension looked quite a bit. Anyway, in this section, we have some platforming challenges, a couple of enemy encounters, and 1 or 2 puzzles that put our polearm to use. We also have to deal with another boss. I can't remember if I mentioned this, so I'll just say it again. A lot of bosses in this game deal a specific type of damage, whether that be lightning, fire, frost, and so on. Kaiser has a base level of resistance to these elements, but it can be further increased with the use of trinkets. The game offers a wide variety of trinkets to choose from, and what these represent are essentially different modifiers for Kaiser. I'll be doing a deep dive into the skill and equipment system in my overall thoughts section at the end of the video. After clearing up a few more sections of enemies, we'd make our way over to a platform. This platform has another mini boss fight for us, so I think now is a good time to talk a bit more about the combat in depth. As you know, there are 3 weapons available to use so far. Each weapon has its own set of combos that you can unleash at any given time. The combo system isn't super complex, and it can be learned quite easily if you put in a bit of time. It mimics Devil May Cry and even Final Fantasy XVI in a sense. Anyway, we finally get our first encounter with this Dimensions Guardian. This boss design is super unique, and one thing I liked about this game is that they never leaned into one specific style. This particular boss doesn't even resemble anything we've seen before. The creativity is definitely there, and something the game should be commended for. Enemy variety in video games are always a key point of discussion for me, especially when the developers have an original world to work with. Dragon's Dogma 2, in my opinion, is one of the biggest offenders when it comes to lackluster enemy variety. Lost Soul aside, however, would rank much higher in that category because the game never locks itself in a box and always throws something new at us. With all that being said, we defeat the Guardian and gather another Soul Crystal fragment. Back in reality, the Emperor meets with Victor and asks for an update on their progress against the Resistance. He mentions that they've been able to grab some Glimmer members, but the interrogations aren't really going anywhere. Victor mentions Kaiser, as well as the fact that our companion is a Voidrax. The Emperor completely flips the script and mentions that they should meet with Kaiser rather than attempting to crush the Resistance. At the meeting, it appears that Irina knows the Emperor very well. In fact, Irina mentions that he would be dead if he had his body. The Emperor then goes on a monologue explaining his experience from the First War.
The humans were no match for them. Led by Irina, the humans found a shred of hope. One of the human leaders discovered that she could channel the Life Nexus, using its power to fend off the Voidrax. That leader was none other than Selena herself. However, she soon realized that even with our assistance, it was impossible for her to fully harness. She used the Life Nexus and Irina's power to seal away the Voidrax extremists, including their leader, Animal. That is how we turned the tide. Irina was gravely injured during the final battle at Mount Salvation, and Celeria dispatched me to retrieve him, trying to save Irina's life and help war refugees. During this time, I started to reflect on everything. People are limited in what they can do, even if they gain that energy. The responsibility of protecting the fate of mankind can only fall on us, the elites. At first, I agreed with her. However, after the war, I changed my mind. Celeria, the Four Lords, and Irina, yes, they are strong indeed. But what if, back before the war, more people could have used the energy of Voidrax and Life Nexus? Defeated Eragon, we could have avoided so many unnecessary deaths. I want to lead humanity on a new path.
And that's why you imprisoned Irina.
To embark on this new path, I needed Irina's energy. After the war, people needed to recover from the trauma. We couldn't risk Irina's return causing panic.
That's all you can come up with after 1,000 years.
I'm not defending myself. There is no need for that. All I have done, and all the Empire has done, has been in the service of humanity. We will do whatever it takes to protect it. The Empire and the Holy Order will assist Glimmer in its fight against the Voidrax.
And why should we believe you?
Because the alternate dimensions.
We'll see about cooperation, but I just don't trust you.
Or me. Trust has to be earned.
Of course, you're free to leave.
Let's go, Arena.
Well, that was a really long cutscene. We did learn a lot about the Emperor and how he came into power, as well as how he had Arena locked away, basically siphoning his power in order to extend his reign far and wide. He tells us he has insight into where the other alternate dimensions are, but the team has a hard time trusting him. Thankfully for us, we have a good idea of where the next alternate dimension already is, which takes us straight to Mistwood, or otherwise known as the Maple Forest. Now, this is where the game begins to get a bit repetitive narrative-wise. If you remember on Mount Salvation, we fought 4 lords who were dealing with corrupted energy. That same exact storyline is more or less repeated, but instead of 4 lords, it's 4 students, with one of them being Zana. In case you're wondering why is here, she was trained under the group's leader and essentially calls the place home. I think without even knowing how this plays out, you already have a very good sense of what we need to do. The Voidrax are somehow appearing in Mistwood. We don't know exactly why yet, but they end up being a secondary storyline for the time being. And the Mistwoods end up being my favorite area to explore. Of the 4 locations that we visit, this one, in my opinion, has the best vibe to it, and I genuinely enjoyed exploring it. Now, for the most part, each of the different regions we've been to have their own enemy type that's tied to that area. The animals or people native to these lands would normally not be hostile, but due to the increase in corrupted energy permeating within the region, everyone and everything decides they are out to kill us. I can't remember when the combat started getting a bit stale, but it felt like around this time was when I was trying to blast my way through encounters. Anyway, not long into our Mistwood journey, we encounter the first of 3 students who have been corrupted. Though the character we're fighting against is fairly minor, I think the actual fight itself was pretty interesting. This dude uses the environment around him to run around and create opportunities for him to strike. It doesn't take us too long to defeat him, and after doing so, he loses his corrupted energy. Does this look familiar to you? I think I'm getting deja vu. He tells us to head to Redwood Village, where the village master might have some crucial information for us. On our way there, however, we run into the other corrupted student. This section is something we've seen a couple times already. As we try to move towards them, the target throws something at us or puts an obstacle in our way. You start seeing the repetitive nature of the game's design. Either way, the journey of getting to Redwood Village isn't as easy as we might have hoped. We run into 2 mini-boss encounters that aren't very difficult, but more so time-consuming. The worst part about it is that at times, the reward for killing these mini-bosses can literally just be some gold. Anyway, we finally make it to the village and talk to the chief. He tells us Master Neverwind, the leader of the corrupted students we've been facing, may be our best bet to getting information about the alternate dimension in the area. Also, this game has these shimmy loading screens. Just can't seem to escape them. We knock out some puzzles using our fancy pole arm, and eventually run into the one and only Master Neverwind himself. Yes, he too is corrupted. Listen, for a game that was in development for a decade, they could have at least came up with some more narrative directions. Did it have to be another area with a number of corrupted individuals that need to be remedied? I think a lot of what holds this game in general is the lackluster narrative. When was the last time we even encountered Armon? Isn't he the biggest threat? The game just has some of these long, drawn-out sections that take far too long to get through. And considering we've only gotten 2 of these Soul Crystal fragments, despite being nearly 40 minutes into the video, should tell you a lot. Anyway, Neverwind tells us the location of the next alternate dimension. Did you think it would be easy getting there? This section had some additional platforming sections that almost drove me insane, but I ended up making my way through eventually. After working our way through some other small encounters and platforming section, we'd finally face another corrupted student. This was the guy who was throwing fireballs as we were platforming earlier. So, some more thoughts on combat. Obviously, it's extremely flashy and it just looks good, but does it feel good? Turns out one of the biggest criticisms of the game was the lack of impactful combat and the actual sound of combat being lackluster. I didn't really get that sense. I mean, I felt like the game accomplished what it was after, a fast-paced and high-octane experience. Now, after defeating Torch, Master Neverwind shows up and decides he wants to teach us a new technique. This technique being the air dash. Yup, another tool in our platforming bag. It's not long before we're putting it to use. I will say jumping off these giant plants is actually kind of fun. We finally come across Zana, who is in a humongous bath. Let's not forget that she is corrupted at this point, so that means only one thing. I'll take these fight sequences as a chance to dish out some more of my thoughts. I think Lost Soul Aside is the perfect 6 out of 10 game. I think the game is also overpriced and should have been in that $40 price range. What it offers isn't really robust in any way, with the best part about being the combat, and even that starts to get repetitive in the later hours of the game. After beating the corruption out of Zana, she shows us where the next alternate dimension might be. Yes, we've been through all this and have yet to make it to the next dimension. After diving down some giant well, we find ourselves in some underground area that is a bit creepy. This area puts your pole arm to use. These sections ask that you shoot at the opposite flower so that yours can go up, allowing you to access wherever you're trying to go. Now the reason why we're even here isn't very clear, but we actually end up getting our next weapon. If I said the game doesn't have a cool selection of weapons, would be a complete lie. As you might guess, the scythe becomes something more than just a weapon used in combat. It also becomes a crucial part of general traversal. Somehow it even guides us into the next dimension.
Your sister's soul will soon be mine.
Never! I won't let that happen.
Calm down. He doesn't have that kind of power yet.
It wouldn't be right if we didn't encounter Ehrman at the very start. Along with that, we get a sneak peek at the Dimensions Guardian. This triangle surrounded by a ball of water. Remember when I said enemy design in this game is super creative? Well, there's another example for you. Anyway, that encounter doesn't last all that long, but within this dimension, we have to use our new weapon to cling onto these hooks and swing across. We do this again and again until you get sick of it. And honestly, you'll get sick of it fairly quickly. Within this dimension is the introduction of this laser that tracks you. If it shoots you, you start the traversal puzzle all over again. This was one of the few that nearly drove me insane. You get a very tiny window to maneuver around the rising and falling platforms. Anyway, we have ourselves a few more mini bosses, as well as some more traversal fun. We fight one mini boss, and then another. Oh wait, I forgot, there's still one more. So we finally make it to the Dimensions Guardian, but this particular Guardian was probably the most annoying. All it really does is blast you with waves and giant bubbles of water while spawning ads to take your attention off it. Also, the first phase of this fight isn't even the real battle. There was this whole other platforming section that I shortened here quite heavily before getting to the actual boss room. Anyway, this was actually the first 3-phase fight that I encountered in the game, and I believe the only 3-phase fight, if I'm not mistaken. After defeating the bubble, the Guardian's true form comes out, which happens to be this giant dude wielding a spear. The last phase was probably the most fun because it had some creative attacks, and the boss was weak to lightning, and at this point my polearm was lightning damage based, so everything lined up for me nicely. We finally get our third soul crystal fragment. This video is starting to run a bit long now, so we can speed run the fourth area. Before we get there, however, there is a large confrontation going on back at the harbor. Remember Vesper? Well, he's now trying to locate Kaiser and is willing to use force in order to do so. Unfortunately for him, the Emperor had ordered the Holy Order to assist Glimmer in their goal of finding the alternate dimensions, and by disobeying the Emperor, Vesper finds himself dealt with.
Majesty!
Please accept my apologies. This incident has been taken.
The Emperor mentions that he is willing to use his full force to aid in the fight against Ahriman. Seeing the Emperor's commitment to the cause, the group starts to slowly trust him, though he does do this very suspicious thing like whispering in Kaiser's ear. But let's just brush that aside for now, because Ahriman is the most immediate threat, meaning that the group is willing to work with the Emperor in order to put an end to the threat. Now, the last location we head to is Frosthold, but for the sake of your sanity and my own, we'll go ahead and speed through this section. Long story short, Zana is actually a princess that hails from Frosthold. She is the daughter of the current king. Zana hasn't seen her father in years, and she left to train with the monks over at Mistwood. Frosthold has always been in a bitter war with the Empire, and have since created a storm wall that doesn't let anyone in or out of the main city. In order to gain access to the city, we had to defeat a guardian named Drogo. This dude ends up bringing the storm wall down, allowing us access. Unfortunately, this doesn't mean we've made it to the alternate dimension. We aren't even close yet. We eventually make it to this elevator that is supposed to take us to the Royal City, or in other words, where the king and the alternate dimension likely are. My favorite part about this whole section is that Zana never even bothers to help us in these fights. I have no idea why, because there have already been 2 moments in this game where she assisted us in combat, but for some reason decides not this time. We use this portal to make our way into the Royal City. The Royal City, however, isn't looking too good. In fact, it looks like it's almost been completely overrun by Voidrax. We do a little platforming, as well as a bit of fighting, and then some more platforming. Oh, and also a bit more fighting as well. We finally get to this section where we have to survive an attack. I'm surprised this objective type wasn't used more often because it changed things up nicely from time to time. Anyway, this section has Victor show up, who provides us with an Imperial airship to make our journey in the Royal City easier. Unfortunately, it gets shot down, but luckily for us, it lands us exactly where we needed to be. So we finally make our way into the Royal Court. In there, we make contact with the king. If it's not obvious enough by his glowing red aura, he's also been corrupted. He recognizes his daughter Zana, but clearly has no control over himself or his actions. So if I had to rank some of the best boss mechanics and boss fights in terms of spectacle and design, this particular fight would be high on my list. I don't know what it was about it, but I genuinely enjoyed this fight far more than the majority of fights in this game. I think it was because it actually had a degree of difficulty to it. Like, this was one of the few fights that I actually found myself having to retry. I think this generally speaks to a larger problem in this game. Despite the game having a fairly complex combat system, a lot of it boils down to just button mashing. And that's totally fine, don't get me wrong. I'm sure a lot of Devil May Cry players just button mash too, but I think what makes this game actually fun is being in danger. For most of my playthrough, the healing potions I had available were more than enough to get me through any encounter. I'd finish most of my fights within 4 or more heals remaining. If there's one real update this game needs, it would be one where they allow the player to choose a higher difficulty to start with. Anyway, we take down the king and bring back from corruption. He tells us the exact location of the alternate dimension, and we waste no time heading there. The Entropus dimension is the second to last dimension. Like the others, it has its own set of enemies and traversal puzzles, but remember, we're speedrunning here, so let's get to the Dimension Guardian, shall we? Oh yeah, of course, we run into Ahriman once more, who gives another speech about how his plan is all coming together, so on and so forth. The final fight in this dimension is against this giant robotic centipede. It's one of the more unique fights in terms of scale, but just boils down to shooting the weak spot on its head over and over again. After defeating another one of his guardians, Ahriman instead attempts to make a deal with Kaiser, telling him they shouldn't be enemies, but instead they should be partners. Clearly, at this point, Ahriman feels threatened despite not showing it.
Souls you stole. You'll never break that seal.
Perhaps you're right. It's true, I don't have enough souls to break the seal. At least, not now. But with its seal weakening with each passing day, breaking it is just a matter of time. For I am eternal.
We'll test that theory.
We make it back to reality with our 4th soul fragment, but there's just one remaining. Victor visits us at our home base and tells us that the Emperor is extending an invitation to his palace. He also mentions that the reason for this invitation is because the alternate dimension is there. We pull up to the palace, and he was totally telling the truth. The 5th and final alternate dimension is there and waiting for us to enter. This final dimension is the Dragon Ruin dimension. It's by far the most unique of the bunch, and you'll see why shortly. Once again, we run into Ahriman. Before I mentioned how we weren't seeing him enough, but now I'm kind of getting sick of him. Anyway, this giant dragon claw breaks the platform and sends us falling to our death. But in a turn of events, Arena regains his dragon form. And instead of being just another dimension to go through, we instead control Arena and just fly around dodging obstacles and breaking barriers. It was definitely a nice and refreshing change of pace that was sorely needed. It's too bad it happened at basically the end of the game. If at this point you're getting strong Final Fantasy XVI vibes, then I wouldn't blame you. We essentially fly on Arena and chase the dragon down until we make it toward the next Soul Crystal fragment. This ends up leading to one of the final boss fights, but if this fight looks familiar to you, then good job paying attention, because the mechanics here are nearly identical to the one we encountered very early on in the game. The main difference here is the bar on the right of the screen, which measures Arena and the other dragon's power. If you take damage, the other dragon gains power, and vice versa. Once the meter fills, you basically get into this boxing minigame with the two dragons. Honestly, this was completely random, and the damage that Arena does in this section is so little that it felt pointless. Anyway, it doesn't take too long to kill the dragon and get the final fragment.
Time to go.
Excellent. Now give me the soul crystal fragments.
We never agreed to handing over these fragments.
Perhaps not, but you will anyway. As you know, my Imperial soldiers are currently protecting people outside the city wall, exactly as I promised.
Get to the point.
You can keep the soul fragments, but then my soldiers will turn from protectors to executioners.
Your Majesty.
Quiet. Can't you see it? With all the soul crystal fragments, I'll become the most powerful being in the world. I'll crush Eramon and lead humanity to a new golden age. It will be glorious. Now give me the soul crystal fragments. Otherwise, all your filthy friends, as well as your sister, will die.
Kaiser, no! You can't!
This was by far one of the funniest scenes in the game. Kaiser just went through hell and back to get these 5 soul crystal fragments. The Emperor makes a threat, and without even saying a word, he hands over the soul crystals. Do you see what I mean when I say that has little to no personality? Like, how do you just hand them over without even muttering a word? It was just so odd. Anyway, to absolutely no one's surprise, it turns out that the Emperor is just another evil guy who is power hungry. His boss fight was another one of the better ones in my opinion. Throughout this fight, we also get some help from some companions like Zana and now Victor. We eventually bring the Emperor down and retrieve the soul crystals once again. Celeria gets word that we have taken down the Emperor. Eramon makes a random appearance and mentions that everyone is essentially falling right into his trap. Somehow he's always one step ahead. At this point, Celeria realizes that even with Arena, the power that Kaiser currently wields is simply not enough to take down Eramon and stop the Voidrax invasion. She mentions that she knows exactly what she has to do to turn the tides in our favor. Back at the home base, and the team is having another meeting. This time around, however, Liana makes an appearance. If you remember, you'll know that Liana is the daughter of Celeria. She sends word that the Voidrax are on their way to Mount Salvation, and her mother has decided to bestow all of her power and abilities onto Kaiser. Liana doesn't want to lose her mother, so she asks that we prove our worth against her. This is a random boss fight that literally appears out of nowhere. I'm not sure if the devs had a boss quota to meet, but this particular fight was just okay. I was never a fan of hitting flying enemies in this game, and this fight was a pretty good example of why. Anyway, we eventually defeat her, and within this pocket dimension, we meet Celeria and the 4 lords that we encountered very early on in the game. They come to an agreement that they wish to bestow their gifted energy and power to Kaiser, transforming him into this hardly human-looking person that clearly is very powerful.
Power, it's unimaginable.
If this next cutscene looks familiar, then 5 bonus points to you. This time around, however, we know exactly what's going on. We arrive on Mount Salvation as an ascended version of Kaiser, the strongest possible version there is, and we are finally ready to put an end to Eramon. Remember that cutscene where he was going to grab someone? Well, that someone turns out to be Kaiser. Kaiser instead grows to his size and fights back.
Took you long enough. You kept me waiting. And you brought me the soul crystal, just as I planned.
What?
I was originally manipulating that fool High Castle. I dangled a hint of the soul crystal in front of him, and he eagerly snatched at it.
So you're the one who enchanted him?
I guided him into extracting Voidrax energy from alternate dimensions, declaring wars everywhere. Much like I did with that old fool, Lord Frosto. Thanks to the water tower, the seal deteriorated rapidly, allowing me to finally regain my strength.
We will end it here.
With just him.
And me. And us.
All these despicable, deluded faces. Brace yourselves for your impending doom.
And finally, with that out of the way, we make it to the final fight of the game against Aramon himself. This is by far one of the most visually challenged boss fights I've experienced literally in any video game. The dude attacks with these light prisms, and finding yourself in between one basically sends you on some sort of acid trip. I have no idea what the developers were thinking when they made this, but just look at it. I mean, it's a miracle I even beat this fight on the first attempt, because if I died, I can't imagine I would want to give this another go. It's honestly just insane that they went ahead with this design. Anyway, the fight itself, other than the extremely bright flashing colors, isn't so hard.
Impossible. After all these millennia, to be defeated by a lesser race again. I still haven't unraveled the mystery of life.
Even in the face of death, you still cling to your obsession. Now is your time to return to the Grand Cycle.
All questions arise from the Grand Cycle.
And all answers are found within the Grand Cycle. That is the creed of the Voidrax.
Hopefully, this ends the cycle of conflict between the Voidrax and humanity.
There must be a new cycle. It's time to start a new path.
Yeah, so basically we defeat Aramon once and for all, and after doing so we place the 5 soul crystals into some alternate dimension from what it looks like. This whole cutscene feels like we're ushering in a new era for Celestria. The Emperor is dead, Aramon has been defeated, and those who used to protect Mount Salvation are also gone. Anyway, after sending these crystals away, those who were affected by the Voidrax soul-stealing agenda slowly start coming back to life. Essentially, their life force is back like they never even left. To them, all of this probably felt like a long nap. Of those people is Louisa, Kazer's sister, who a lot of us have probably completely forgotten about at this point.
What happened, Kazer?
Not much. But everything is gonna be fine now. How are you feeling?
I had a dream. A weird one.
About what?
Oh, I've already forgotten. I'm hungry, Kazer. It feels like I haven't eaten in weeks. What do you fancy?
We then explain to Louisa exactly what took place, and we get a rundown on what the current state of affairs are. Victor has taken the role of Emperor and wants to bring in an era of equality and fairness. Frosthold no longer wants to be in isolation, so they send Zana as an emissary to negotiate on the behalf of the region with the Empire. Essentially it's all one big happy ending for everyone involved. Lord Arena and Kaiser say their goodbyes as Arena returns to the universe. And with that marks the end of Lost Soul Aside. So after finishing the game, you do unlock a boss rush mode that allows you to take down a sequence of bosses for potential rewards. And you can also replay the entire campaign on a higher difficulty. Now that we've completed it on normal, we can move on to hard. Unfortunately, I think one playthrough was more than enough for me. So yeah, that wraps up Lost Soul Aside, but let's get into my thoughts section. I'll start with the skill tree. I think the skill system in this game is actually quite good. See, each weapon you unlock has its own set of base abilities and combos. The skill trees expand and allow you to do a couple of things. Firstly, you can unlock completely new moves in addition to your existing moveset. Secondly, you can augment your already existing moveset by unlocking an additional mechanic that changes how the combo behaves. And lastly, you can unlock permanent buffs for Kaiser. These include things like additional trinket and arena power slots, as well as attribute upgrades like more crit chance or crit damage. All in all, I think the skill system is actually solid, and there are a lot of upgrades worth pursuing. The inventory system is fairly basic. You can equip up to 3 different trinkets, and each trinket have some property tied to them. This is essentially how you create a build, so to speak. You can equip trinkets that all heal you in some shape or form, whether that be healing on a perfect dodge or after defeating an enemy. You can also find trinkets that buff your crit damage, or even ones that make it so your arena powers recharge faster. This is where the build diversity will come in, and we'll let players get creative with how they approach combat. There's a decent amount of different trinkets to choose from, so there's enough room to spice things up. As mentioned before, the weapon assembly system is actually pretty cool and something I enjoyed messing around with. You can pretty much build a weapon with a variety of accessories that complement the trinkets that I just talked about. The best part about these accessories is that they actually get placed on the weapons themselves. You can create some really ugly combinations if you choose to do so. Anyway, I'll share my final thoughts about the game. Overall, I think the game is solid, but did start to get both bland and frustrating the more I played. I think the game was too long for its own good, and a lot of the mini platforming and combat sections felt like they were put in for the sake of a longer runtime. The narrative overall was pretty weak and was incredibly predictable through and through. The voice acting was up there with some of the worst, especially when it comes to Kaiser. I don't think I've seen such a stale main character in quite some time. Overall, I think I'd give this game a 6 out of 10. There are some fun sections, and the combat itself was pretty engaging. The level and environmental design was impressive at times as well. The boss and enemy design was by far the highlight for me, with the game showcasing some of the best boss battles I've seen in any game. Some of the designs were so unique and creative that at times I was really surprised at how well thought out everything about them was. Well, anyway, that wraps up this video. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to hit the like button and consider maybe even subscribing.